It was Friday the 13th, 1972, a day already steeped in superstition. But for the 45 passengers aboard Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, it would become the worst day of their lives. Imagine being trapped in the freezing Andes Mountains, surrounded by the bodies of your friends. No food, no rescue, no hope. And as the days turned into weeks, you're faced with an impossible question. What would you do to survive? But what if I told you that this isn't just a story of survival? It's a story of a film that almost didn't happen. The dangers faced by the cast and crew mirrored the real horrors of the crash. Stay with us until the end to discover how the mountain nearly claimed more lives. Even decades later, the Andes Mountains have long been considered sacred by indigenous civilizations, home to powerful spirits known as apus. For centuries, these mountain deities were believed to protect the land, but also punish those who dared trespass. Did the spirits of the Andes try to send a message in 1972? And when Netflix revisited this haunted ground, did the mountains rise again to warn them? This is the true story of the Andes flight disaster, and the Netflix film that brought it back to life, where the cast and crew faced dangers so real, it was as if the mountain itself didn't want the story told. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe for more mysteries and survival stories every week. The passengers on board were young, mostly members of the Old Christians rugby team from Montevideo, Uruguay. They were heading to Chile for a match, filled with excitement and laughter. But as the plane soared over the Andes Mountains, the mood shifted. The mountains weren't just beautiful, they were deadly. The pilot, believing they'd cleared the range, descended too early, but they were still surrounded by towering peaks. And then, the plane's right wing clipped a mountain. It was torn off instantly. Moments later, the left wing was sheared away. The fuselage, carrying 45 souls, plummeted into the snow at over 200 miles per hour. It's said that some passengers screamed, others prayed, and a few just sat in stunned silence. When the wreckage came to a halt, 12 people were dead. But for the 33 survivors, the nightmare had only just begun. The survivors were trapped at 12,000 feet, surrounded by endless snow. The cold was merciless, minus 30 degrees Celsius at night, with nothing but the plane's torn fuselage for shelter. They rationed what little they had, a few chocolate bars, some wine, peanuts. But it wasn't enough. By the 8th day, their food was gone. Hopes of rescue faded fast. They had a small radio, and on the 10th day, they heard devastating news. The search had been called off. The world had given up on them. Imagine the despair, the crushing realization that no one was coming. Then came the hardest decision of all. Weeks of starvation pushed them to the brink. They faced a truth no one could bear. To survive, they would have to eat the bodies of their dead friends. This wasn't a decision made lightly. Survivors like Roberto Canessa described it as a moment of spiritual agony. They prayed, wept, and begged for another solution. But in the end, their bodies were wasting away. Death was closing in. And so, they made the unthinkable choice. The first cuts were the hardest, delicate, respectful, almost ritualistic. They started with the skin and muscle from the buttocks, areas that felt less personal. Each bite was an act of survival, but also of profound grief. They whispered apologies to the friends they were consuming, hoping their souls would understand. Some survivors refused at first, but after days of unbearable hunger, they too succumbed. The emotional toll was as devastating as the physical one. Every meal was a reminder of their loss and their will to live. It was not out of savagery, it was out of desperation, out of a will to live. Weeks passed, and then hope appeared. Two men, Fernando Parado and Roberto Canessa, refused to give up. With nothing but scraps of clothing and a homemade sleeping bag, they set out on an unimaginable trek. For 10 days, they climbed through blizzards, over treacherous peaks, and across glaciers. Their bodies were breaking down, but their spirits refused. On December 20th, 1972, they spotted a Chilean shepherd on horseback. That man, Sergio Catalan, became their lifeline. 3 days later, rescuers reached the crash site. 16 survivors were pulled from the jaws of death, 72 days after the crash. But the story didn't end there. When Netflix decided to adapt this harrowing tale in 2023 as Society of the Snow, the crew faced their own terrifying ordeal. Directed by J.A. Bayona, the film was shot in the real Andes Mountains, not far from the actual crash site. The cast, including Enzo Vogrincic as Numa Turcati, battled freezing temperatures, altitude sickness, and even avalanches during filming. At one point, a sudden blizzard trapped the crew, mirroring the exact conditions that doomed the original passengers. Some actors reported eerie feelings, as if the mountain itself was haunted by the past. Indigenous cultures have long believed that the spirits of the Andes protect their sacred ground and punish those who disturb it. Was this nature's warning? A reminder that some stories are better left untold? The lines between the film and reality blurred, and many wondered if the mountain still held a grudge. But what exactly happened on that set? Stay with us to the end to uncover the chilling stories from behind the scenes. It wasn't just the weather. During one of the most critical scenes, several pieces of equipment malfunctioned simultaneously. Lights flickered, cameras froze, and communication devices cut out. Crew members described feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as if unseen eyes were watching them. Some even claimed to hear faint whispers carried by the wind, voices that echoed the desperation of the original survivors. The eeriest moment came when an avalanche struck a nearby set piece right after filming wrapped for the day, missing the crew by mere minutes. Many were left wondering, was it all just coincidence? Or were the spirits of the Andes making their presence known? But survival came at a cost far beyond the mountains. When the survivors returned home, they were met with a world eager for details and quick to judge. Newspapers sensationalized their ordeal, focusing on the cannibalism rather than the courage. Some called them heroes. Others whispered words like monsters. The emotional toll was immense. Fernando Parado, one of the men who trekked through the mountains to find help, later said, "We were not heroes. We were ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances." Roberto Canessa became a doctor, dedicating his life to saving others, perhaps as a way to reconcile with the lives lost in the Andes. The ethical debates about their choices still echo today. Was their decision to eat the dead a betrayal of humanity, or the ultimate act of survival? What would you have done in their place? The Andes plane crash is a story of unimaginable horror, but also of unbreakable human spirit. It forces us to ask ourselves, what would you do to survive? Would you have made the same choices? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're fascinated by true survival stories, subscribe for more tales that defy belief. Because sometimes, the truth is more terrifying than fiction.